They laughed as the seal built into stone, but when the blizzard hit, his cabin stayed 74 degrees Fahrenheit while others froze. The storm came without mercy, burying the Montana Valley under walls of wind and ice. Fires roared, wood vanished, and homes turned into traps of cold. But deep in a silent rock alcove, a Navy SEAL and his loyal dog sat in steady warmth, untouched by chaos, while the same neighbors who mocked him began to realize they had nowhere else to turn. Comment 1 if you trust preparation over luck, or 0 if you'd stay with the crowd, and tell me where you're watching from. The wind did not howl. It screamed. It tore across the Bitterroot Valley like something alive, something angry, ripping through fences, slamming against cabin walls, clawing at every weak seam it could find. Snow didn't fall. It drove sideways in sharp, relentless sheets, turning the world into a blinding white storm that swallowed distance, direction, and sound. The thermometer nailed to the side of Travis Boone's barn read -32 degrees, and still dropping. Inside the Boone house, the fire roared so hard it warped the iron grate, flames snapping and twisting like they were fighting for their own survival. Travis fed another log into the blaze, his breath visible even in his own living room. "Dad, I'm cold." The voice came from the couch. His daughter, Lily, curled beneath 2 quilts, her cheeks pale, her lips trembling despite the layers. Travis swallowed hard and shoved another piece of wood into the fire. "You're not cold," he said, forcing a tone he didn't feel. "That's just your body adjusting." But the truth was heavier than the storm outside. The house wasn't holding heat. None of them were. Across the valley, the same battle was being fought in every home. Chimneys belched thick columns of smoke into the gray sky, evidence of desperation. Families burned through their winter supplies at a terrifying pace. Wood that should have lasted months was disappearing in weeks, now days. And still, the cold kept coming. In the distance, through the veil of snow, something strange caught Travis's eye. A thin line of smoke, barely visible, rising slow and steady from the canyon wall, from that place. Travis's jaw tightened. "Unbelievable," he muttered under his breath, because deep in the rock alcove carved into the mountainside, where no sane man would build, Ethan Cole was sitting warm. Inside the alcove, the storm was nothing but a distant voice, muted, dulled, powerless. The stone walls wrapped around the small cabin like the ribs of the mountain itself, shielding it from the wind's fury. Snow piled thick at the outer edge of the alcove, but inside the air remained still, almost calm, like stepping into a different world. Ethan Cole sat at a simple wooden table, one hand wrapped around a tin cup of black coffee. He wasn't wearing a coat, just a worn flannel shirt, sleeves rolled to the forearms. The fire behind him was small, no bigger than what a man might use to cook a meal. A quiet, steady flame nestled inside a compact stone fireplace. Nothing about it looked powerful. And yet, the thermometer hanging beside the door read a steady, unwavering number, 74 degrees. Across the room, Atlas lay stretched out near the fire, his large frame relaxed, his thick coat rising and falling with slow, steady breaths. The German shepherd's ears twitched occasionally, picking up distant sounds beyond human hearing, but there was no tension in him, no urgency, no fear. That alone said everything. Ethan glanced at the thermometer again, more out of habit than concern. 74. Same as it had been hours ago. Same as it had been yesterday. Outside, men were fighting to survive. Inside, the mountain held its warmth like a secret. Ethan took a slow sip of coffee, eyes drifting toward the alcove entrance where the storm raged in white chaos. He could see it, but he didn't feel it. Not here. not inside something that had been built to work with the cold, not against it. Atlas suddenly lifted his head, not alarmed, aware. His ears angled forward, eyes locking on the entrance. Ethan didn't move right away. He trusted the dog, always had. "What is it, boy?" he asked quietly. Atlas didn't bark, didn't growl. He simply stood, slow and deliberate, and walked toward the door. Ethan set his cup down. The shift was subtle, but real. Not danger. Not yet. But something had changed. Outside, the wind howled again, rattling the outer snowpack, sending loose powder swirling across the alcove floor. The storm was intensifying, and somewhere beyond it, someone was watching. Half a mile away, 3 men stood shoulder to shoulder near the edge of the canyon, bundled in thick coats, faces red from the cold. Travis Boone, Walter Griggs, and young Ben Avery. They stared at the alcove, at the thin ribbon of smoke rising into the storm. Walter shook his head, disbelief etched deep in his face. "That's not right," he said. "It shouldn't be possible." Ben squinted through the snow, trying to make sense of it. "He's barely burning anything," Ben said. "I've been watching since morning. That fire should have died hours ago." Travis didn't answer. He just stared, because he remembered the laughter, clear as day. That afternoon in the diner, months ago, when Ethan Cole first told them what he was planning, building into the rock, like some kind of animal. Travis had laughed the loudest, called him a fool, said the mountain would freeze him out faster than any open field ever could. And now his own house couldn't hold heat. Now his daughter was shivering under blankets. Now he was burning through wood like it meant nothing. And that man, that quiet, stubborn, broken-looking ex-SEAL, was sitting somewhere inside that rock, warm, comfortable, untouched. The wind screamed again, louder this time, forcing all 3 men to turn their faces away. Ben spoke first. "You think he's okay in there?" Travis hesitated, just for a second, then shook his head. "No one's okay in weather like this." But his voice lacked conviction, because deep down, something didn't add up. Back inside the alcove, Atlas stopped at the door. His body was still, focused. Ethan rose slowly from his chair, every movement controlled, deliberate. Years of training never left a man, not really. Even now, in a quiet mountain cabin, his instincts moved beneath the surface like something waiting. He stepped beside Atlas and rested a hand lightly on the dog's back. Warm, steady, alive. "What do you hear?" he murmured. Atlas's ears twitched again. Then he let out a low, almost silent breath. Not a warning. Not yet. Ethan looked at the door, at the thick wood, at the iron latch, at the storm pressing against it. For a brief moment, a flicker passed through his mind. Not fear. Memory. Heat. Sand. Gunfire. A voice calling his name that never got answered. Ethan blinked once. The mountain replaced it. The cabin replaced it. Atlas shifted slightly, leaning into his leg, grounding him, pulling him back. Ethan exhaled slowly. "Yeah," he whispered. "We're good." The dog settled again, and the storm kept screaming. That night, the temperature would drop even further. The wind would grow stronger, and the valley would begin to break. But inside the rock, inside the quiet, impossible warmth of that hidden alcove, something else was building. Not just survival, not just shelter, but the kind of truth that only reveals itself when everything else starts to fail. And soon, the people who laughed the loudest would be the first to knock on that door. But months earlier, before the snow, before the silence, before the storm turned the valley into something unforgiving, no one had been laughing yet. Ethan Cole arrived in late summer. The mountains were still green then, pine trees stretching endlessly across the ridges, the air sharp but clean, carrying the scent of earth and sun-warmed stone. The Bitterroot Valley looked like a place where a man could start over, or at least try. The truck he drove was older than most of the homes scattered across the valley. Dust-covered, quiet. It rolled slowly down the gravel road until it stopped at the edge of a wide, open clearing bordered by forest on 3 sides. Ethan shut off the engine and sat there for a moment, listening. Not to the birds, not to the wind, but to the absence of everything else. No engines, no voices, no distant thunder that wasn't weather, just stillness. In the passenger seat, Atlas didn't move right away. The German shepherd simply watched Ethan, amber eyes steady, reading him the way he always did, waiting. Ethan finally exhaled. "Yeah," he said softly. "This'll do." Atlas's tail thumped once against the seat. That was all the agreement he needed. The land wasn't much to look at. Flat ground. A shallow creek nearby. Enough trees for timber if a man knew how to use them. Most folks in the valley had already picked spots like this. Places that were easy to build on, easy to reach, easy to survive in. That was the word they all used. Easy. Ethan stepped out of the truck, boots crunching against dry gravel. The sunlight hit his face, but his eyes didn't relax the way they used to. They scanned. Tree line. Open ground. Approach routes. Always calculating. Always measuring. Atlas jumped down beside him, immediately circling once, then twice, nose low, taking in every scent. He paused at the edge of the clearing, ears forward, then glanced back at Ethan. Not anxious, just aware. "You see it too?" Ethan asked quietly. Atlas didn't move. He didn't need to. Ethan felt it anyway. The openness, the exposure. It looked safe, but it wasn't controlled, and Ethan didn't trust anything he couldn't control. The first few days were quiet, unsettlingly quiet. At night, the silence became something heavier. Ethan would lie awake in the back of the truck, staring at the ceiling, listening for sounds that weren't there anymore, but still lived in his mind. A distant pop, a sudden shift, a voice calling out. Sometimes he would sit up before he realized where he was. Montana, not the desert, not the heat, not the chaos. Atlas always knew. Before Ethan's breathing even changed, the dog would rise, move closer, press against him, solid, grounding, real, bringing him back, every time. "You're good," Ethan would whisper, even though he wasn't sure if he meant the dog or himself. On the 4th morning, Ethan took his rifle and headed into the trees, not because he needed to hunt, because he needed to move. Atlas stayed close, weaving silently between the trunks, his movements effortless, controlled. Every few seconds he would pause, listening, checking, then continue. They moved deeper than Ethan had planned, past the familiar, into terrain that shifted, steeper ground, narrower paths, rock formations rising through the forest like bones pushing up through skin. The air felt different there, cooler, sharper. Atlas stopped suddenly, completely still. Ethan froze too. "What is it?" he asked under his breath. Atlas didn't bark, didn't growl. He turned his head slightly and looked uphill. Then, without hesitation, he started moving. Fast. Ethan followed. Up through brush and stone, boots slipping against loose gravel, branches snapping as they pushed higher into terrain that hadn't been touched in years. The canyon revealed itself slowly. Walls of granite rising on either side, narrowing the world into shadow and light. The air cooled further as they descended slightly into its center. And then Atlas stopped, right at the edge of something Ethan hadn't seen coming. A massive rock overhang, carved into the cliff like nature had scooped out a piece of the mountain and left behind a hollow space, deep, wide, protected. Ethan stepped forward cautiously. His boots crossed from sunlit ground into shadow. And everything changed. The wind disappeared. Completely. The air inside the alcove was still. Not cold. Not warm. Just steady. Ethan frowned slightly and reached out, placing his hand against the stone wall. It wasn't freezing. It held something. A trace of warmth. Stored. Lingering. He stepped deeper inside. The ceiling rose high above him, shielding the space from above. The ground was dry. No mud, no pooled water. Just packed earth and scattered debris from seasons long past. Atlas walked in behind him, and for the first time since they'd arrived in Montana, he relaxed. His posture softened. His breathing slowed. He moved to the center of the alcove, turned once and then sat, calm, grounded, certain, like he had found something. Ethan watched him carefully. "You like it here?" he asked. Atlas looked up at him. No tension, no alertness, just quiet. Ethan turned slowly, taking in the full shape of the alcove, the angle of the opening, the way the canyon walls blocked the wind, the way the sunlight reached just far enough in to warm the stone before retreating, the way the space held itself, like it was designed, not random, not accidental, useful. His mind began to move, not with emotion, with calculation, wind protection, thermal mass, natural insulation. He stepped back toward the entrance, then inside again, testing the difference. It was undeniable. Outside, the air shifted constantly. Inside, everything stabilized. Ethan exhaled slowly. "You see it," he murmured. Atlas stood and walked to his side. Two soldiers, reading the terrain, understanding something others would walk past without ever noticing. Ethan glanced back out toward the valley, miles away, hidden behind ridges and trees. Flat land, easy land, the kind everyone chose. Then he looked back at the stone, at the mountain, at the quiet space that felt right. "This isn't a cave," he said quietly. "It's a shelter." Atlas's tail moved once. Agreement. Ethan nodded to himself. The decision formed not as a question, but as certainty. "Yeah," he said. "We build here." By the time they returned to the truck, the sun was already lowering behind the mountains. The valley looked peaceful again. Normal. Deceptively safe. But Ethan no longer saw it the same way. And Atlas didn't either. That night, as the temperature dropped and the wind began to whisper through the trees, Ethan slept a little easier. Because somewhere beyond the darkness, they had already found the place that would save them. They just didn't know yet. How many others would need it too? The next morning, the valley looked exactly the way people liked it. Open, quiet, predictable. Sunlight stretched across wide pasture land, touching rooftops, fences, and smoke curling lazily from chimneys. It was the kind of place where things made sense, where a man built on flat ground, cut wood in straight lines, and followed the same patterns his neighbors trusted. It was the kind of place where Ethan Cole didn't belong. He drove into town just after sunrise, the old truck rumbling down Main Street, past a hardware store, a feed supply shop, and finally stopping outside a small diner with a flickering sign that read, Maggie's Kitchen. Atlas stayed in the truck at first, watching through the window as Ethan stepped out. The dog's eyes tracked everything. People, movement, tone, always reading. Inside the diner, warmth hit Ethan immediately, not just from the stove but from voices, laughter, conversation. The hum of a community that had known each other long before he arrived. Heads turned when he walked in. They always did. Not because of who he was, but because he was new and different. Ethan nodded once, acknowledging no one in particular, and took a seat at the counter. The waitress, Maggie herself, poured him coffee without asking. "You settling in all right?" she asked, friendly but curious. Ethan gave a small nod. "Getting there." Before she could say more, a voice rose from behind him. "Getting there to what, exactly?" The tone carried confidence, a little too much of it. Ethan didn't turn right away, but he knew the voice. Travis Boone, a man who filled rooms without needing permission. Ethan took a slow sip of coffee before turning slightly on his stool. Travis stood near a booth, arms crossed, a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I heard you picked land up by the creek," Travis said. "Good spot. Easy build." Ethan shrugged lightly. "It's land." A few chuckles rolled through the room. Travis stepped closer. "So when you starting construction?" There it was. The question everyone had been waiting to ask. Ethan set his cup down. "I already started." Travis raised an eyebrow. "Oh yeah?" Ethan met his gaze. "Up in the canyon, inside a rock alcove." For a moment, silence. Then, laughter. Not quiet laughter, not polite laughter. Real laughter. From every direction. Someone at the back slapped the table. Another shook his head, muttering something under his breath. Even Maggie paused, unsure whether to smile or not. Travis let out a sharp laugh and leaned back slightly. "You're serious?" he said. "You're building in a hole in the mountain?" "It's not a hole," Ethan replied calmly. "It's protected terrain." That only made it worse. "Protected from what?" someone called out. "Common sense?" More laughter. Travis stepped closer now, shaking his head. "Let me get this straight," he said. "You passed up good flat land to live like a coyote in a rock den?" Ethan didn't react, didn't defend, didn't argue. He just said, "Wind doesn't ask permission. It finds every gap you leave open." The room quieted just slightly. Not convinced, just curious. Travis smirked. "Yeah, well, that's why we build proper cabins," he said. "Logs, fireplaces, space. You know, like people." Ethan leaned back slightly on his stool. "People freeze every winter," he said simply. That landed, not loud, but heavy. Travis's smile tightened. "That's why we stock wood," he shot back. "Plenty of it." Ethan nodded once. "Until it runs out." The tension shifted. Subtle, but real. Travis didn't like that. Didn't like the way Ethan spoke like he knew something no one else did. So he laughed again, louder this time. "Well, good luck with your cave," he said, turning back toward his table. "Let us know how that works out when winter hits." More laughter followed. Ethan turned back to his coffee, unbothered. Or at least, that's how it looked. Outside, Atlas lifted his head the moment Ethan stepped out of the diner. He didn't wag his tail, didn't greet him like a pet. He watched, studied. Ethan opened the door and climbed in, exhaling slowly as he shut it behind him. Atlas leaned forward slightly, pressing his nose against Ethan's arm, checking, grounding. Ethan reached over and rested a hand on the dog's neck. "They don't see it," he said quietly. Atlas didn't move. "They see what's easy," Ethan continued, "not what works." The dog's ears flicked once. That was enough. Ethan started the truck. As they pulled away from town, he glanced once in the rearview mirror, at the diner, at the people inside it, at the life he had no interest in joining. Then he turned his eyes back to the road ahead, to the canyon, to the place no one else believed in. Construction began that same afternoon. No ceremony, no announcement, just work. Ethan moved with precision, not speed. Every piece of wood was measured, every cut intentional. He positioned the cabin frame deep inside the alcove, not at the edge where wind could still creep in, but far enough back where the stone wrapped around it like armor. Atlas stayed close, always moving, always watching. He would circle the structure, pause, tilt his head slightly, then shift position, as if something didn't feel right. More than once, Ethan adjusted based on that, moved a beam, reinforced a corner, sealed a gap, not because he doubted himself, but because he trusted the dog, more than anything. Days passed, then weeks. The valley watched from a distance, some with curiosity, most with amusement. Travis Boone made sure of that. Anytime someone mentioned Ethan, the jokes followed. "Man's building himself a tomb. Won't last a week once the snow hits. Probably talking to rocks already." The laughter kept coming, because it was easier to laugh than to question what they didn't understand. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the mountains, Ethan stood at the edge of the alcove, looking out over the valley. The wind had picked up slightly, just enough to remind him. Atlas stepped beside him, sitting quietly. Ethan folded his arms. "They think I'm crazy," he said. Atlas didn't respond. Didn't need to. Ethan's gaze drifted to the distant homes, to the smoke rising from chimneys, to the way the valley looked peaceful, but exposed. "They're building against the cold," he murmured. He glanced back at the stone behind him, at the alcove, at the quiet strength of it. "I'm building with it." Atlas shifted slightly, leaning into him, and for the first time since arriving in Montana, Ethan allowed himself the smallest hint of certainty. Not hope, not yet, but something close, because deep down, he already knew. When winter came, this wouldn't be the place that failed. It would be the place they all remembered. But before it could become that, it had to be built right. Not fast, not easy. Right. The first thing Ethan Cole built wasn't the walls. It was the ground beneath them. He cleared the alcove floor down to packed earth and stone, removing debris layer by layer until the surface felt solid under his boots. Then he raised the foundation, not directly on the ground, but slightly above it. 6 inches. It didn't look like much, but it meant everything. Cold crept from below as easily as it did from the wind. Ethan had learned that long ago, places where the ground itself could pull heat out of a man faster than the air ever could. So he built a barrier, a space between the earth and the cabin floor. Airflow, control. Atlas watched every step. He moved along the perimeter, nose low, ears turning constantly. Sometimes he would stop at a corner, stare at it, then look back at Ethan. Those were the moments Ethan paid attention. He'd walk over, crouch, run his hand along the edge, and more than once, he found something. A gap, a weakness, a place where cold would slip through later. He sealed every one of them. The walls came next, log by log, measured, fitted, locked into place with a precision that had nothing to do with carpentry and everything to do with survival. This wasn't a home, it was a system. Each log sat tight against the next, no space wide enough for wind to whisper through, no careless angles, no rushed cuts. Ethan worked in silence most days. The only sounds were wood against wood, steel tools biting into grain, and Atlas moving steadily around him. Sometimes, though, the silence broke. It always started the same way. A sound that wasn't there. A flicker at the edge of his vision. A memory pushing through. Ethan would pause mid-motion, hand still gripping a tool, his breathing slowing, then tightening. The alcove would fade, replaced by heat, by dust, by a sky that wasn't Montana blue. Voices shouting, boots hitting sand. A man calling out, "Cole!" Ethan blinked hard. The sound snapped away. The mountain came back. Cold air. Still stone. Atlas. Always Atlas. The dog would already be there. Pressed close. Solid. Real. Ethan would lower his hand slowly, resting it against the thick fur at Atlas's neck. "Yeah," he'd whisper. "I'm here." The dog didn't move. Didn't need to. He just stayed. And that was enough. The rear wall was the most important. Ethan built it closest to the stone face of the alcove, just a few feet away. Not touching. Never touching. There had to be space. A channel. He moved carefully there, adjusting the angle, checking the distance again and again. 3 feet. No more. No less. That space would allow air to move, heat to rise, stone to absorb, and later, to return it. He didn't explain it to anyone, didn't need to. He had seen what heat did when it was trapped, and what it did when it was wasted. The fireplace came last, small, deliberate, nothing like the massive hearths other men built to prove strength. Ethan didn't need a fire that roared. He needed one that worked. He shaped the stone by hand, setting each piece with care, angling the interior so heat would push outward, not escape upward. The firebox was narrow, efficient, focused. Above it, he built the chimney, not straight up, but angled back, into the gap behind the cabin, into the stone, using the mountain itself. Atlas watched that part more closely than anything else. He circled behind the cabin repeatedly, sniffing the space, pausing, listening. Once he stopped and let out a low sound, not a growl, a warning. Ethan followed him, studied the area, then nodded. "Too tight," he said. He widened the gap slightly, adjusted the angle, let the air move better. Atlas relaxed. Ethan didn't question it. He never did. Days blurred into weeks. The valley moved on with its routines, cutting wood, fixing fences, preparing for a winter they thought they understood. Up in the alcove, a different kind of preparation was happening. One built on patience, on memory, on lessons learned the hard way. The door took the longest. Ethan built it thick, heavy, layered. Not just wood, but reinforced with cross-bracing, sealed edges, and a fit so tight it resisted even a sliver of light. When it closed completely. No draft, no weakness, no compromise. He tested it over and over, opening, closing, standing inside, listening, feeling for movement in the air. There was none, just stillness. The roof came together under the early signs of fall. Cooler mornings, longer shadows. Ethan layered it carefully. Planks, ceiling material, insulation, and finally a covering that blended into the alcove itself. From a distance, the cabin didn't stand out. It disappeared, hidden inside the mountain, protected by it. The first fire was small. Ethan didn't rush it. He lit it slowly, feeding it just enough to catch, then stepped back. Watched. Measured. Atlas sat nearby, eyes fixed on the flame. Minutes passed, then an hour. The warmth began to spread. Not fast, not overwhelming, but steady. Ethan moved to the back wall, placing his hand against the wood. Warm. He stepped outside, moving behind the cabin into the narrow gap. The stone was cool, but changing. Slowly, almost imperceptibly. He nodded once. "It's working," he said quietly. Atlas's tail moved once. Agreement. That night, Ethan sat inside the finished cabin for the first time. No wind, no noise. Just the soft crackle of a controlled fire. The thermometer hung near the door. 58 degrees. Not high. Not yet. But stable. Ethan leaned back slightly in his chair, eyes drifting toward the flame. For once, the silence didn't press against him. It didn't carry echoes. It didn't pull him backward. It just existed. Atlas lay at his feet, head resting on his boots, present, anchored, real. Ethan reached down, resting a hand against him. "You did good," he said softly. Atlas didn't move, didn't need to. Outside, the first true cold of the season crept into the valley. Slow, quiet, unnoticed by most. But up in the alcove, Ethan Cole had already built something different. Not a house, not a shelter, something stronger, something smarter, something the storm hadn't tested yet, but would. Soon. And when it did, there would be no guessing left. Only truth. And the truth began quietly. Not with a storm, not with disaster, but with a single morning that felt just a little colder than it should have. Frost came early that year. It settled across the valley before sunrise, turning fences white, stiffening grass into brittle glass, coating rooftops in a thin layer that shimmered under the first light. Most people noticed it. Few respected it. "Early bite," Travis Boone said, stepping out onto his porch, breath puffing into the cold air. "Happens every few years." Behind him, Lily stood in the doorway, wrapped in a sweater too big for her frame. "Is winter coming already?" she asked. Travis glanced back and gave her a half smile. "Not yet," he said. "This is nothing." But his eyes drifted across the valley, to the trees, to the sky, to the way the wind had shifted overnight. Something in it felt different. Sharper, less forgiving. He turned away from it, because men like Travis didn't worry about the cold. They outworked it. Up in the alcove, Ethan Cole was already awake. Atlas had woken him before dawn, not with noise, with presence. A shift in the dog's breathing, a subtle tension in his posture, the kind of signal Ethan had learned never to ignore. He sat up slowly, eyes scanning the cabin. Still. Quiet. But something had changed. He stood and moved toward the door, opening it just enough to let the air slip inside. Cold rushed in, clean, dry, and deeper than it should have been for early fall. Ethan stepped outside. The alcove held its calm, but beyond it, the valley carried a different weight. The kind of cold that didn't pass through, the kind that settled in. Atlas stepped beside him, nose lifted slightly, testing the air. Ethan glanced down at him. You feel it too? Atlas didn't move. He didn't need to. Ethan exhaled slowly. Yeah, he murmured. It's coming. The changes were small at first, subtle, easy to ignore. Wind patterns shifted. Nights stretched colder. The ground began to hold frost longer each morning before the sun could burn it away. In town, people adapted the way they always did. More wood, bigger fires, heavier coats, routine adjustments, nothing more. At Maggie's diner, the conversations stayed light. Just a cold snap. Won't last. Winter never hits this early. Travis leaned back in his usual booth, boots crossed, coffee in hand. Let it come, he said with a grin. I've got enough wood stacked to last 2 winters. Laughter followed. Confidence always sounded good in a warm room. Ben Avery sat quietly near the window, listening but not joining in. His eyes drifted outside, toward the mountains, toward the canyon, toward something he couldn't quite explain. Up in the alcove, Ethan didn't talk about it. He adjusted. The fire stayed small, but he burned it longer in the afternoons now, letting heat build slowly into the stone behind the cabin. He checked seals, reinforced edges, closed anything that didn't need to be open. Every movement had purpose. Atlas mirrored him. The dog's behavior changed in ways only Ethan would notice. Less wandering, more watching. At night, Atlas no longer slept fully stretched out. He stayed closer, alert, ears twitching at sounds beyond the alcove. Twice Ethan caught him standing at the entrance, staring into the darkness long after the fire had burned low. Listening, waiting. Ethan never called him back. If Atlas was watching, there was a reason. One evening, the wind picked up without warning. Not strong, not yet, but sharp. It slipped through the valley with a bite that made people pause. Doors shut quicker. Windows latched tighter. Travis stood outside his barn, watching the clouds roll in low across the mountains. He frowned slightly, just for a moment, then shook it off. Still nothing, he muttered. But his hand lingered on the barn door a little longer than usual. That same wind reached the alcove and stopped. It hit the outer wall of stone, broke apart, and slid around the canyon like water around a rock. Inside, the air barely moved. Ethan stood near the back wall, hand resting against the wood. Warm, steady. He stepped behind the cabin, into the narrow space, placed his hand against the stone, warmer than before. The heat was building, slowly, exactly as it should. He nodded once. Good, he said quietly. Atlas appeared beside him, silent, watching. Ethan glanced down. You trust it? Atlas held his gaze, then sat, calm, certain. Ethan allowed himself the smallest shift in his posture. Not relaxation, but something close. The first real test came 3 nights later. The temperature dropped hard, fast, without warning. In the valley, fires burned brighter than ever. Logs cracked and popped, sending sparks up chimneys that never seemed to stop smoking. Inside homes, people pulled blankets tighter, shifting closer to the hearths. Still, the cold found its way in. Through cracks, through floors, through places no one had noticed before. Travis woke in the middle of the night, breath fogging in the dim light. He sat up slowly, looking toward the fireplace. The fire was still going, strong, but the room felt wrong, too cold for how hard it was burning. He frowned and swung his legs over the side of the bed. Across the house, Lily stirred under her blankets. "Dad?" she murmured. "I'm here," he said quickly. He moved to the fire, adding another log. The flames surged higher, heat pushed outward, but it didn't stay. It slipped away, vanishing into the walls, the floor, the unseen spaces that had never mattered before. Travis stared at it for a long moment, then shook his head. "Just the first cold," he muttered. But the doubt had already started. Up in the alcove, Ethan slept. Not deeply, not completely, but enough. The cabin held steady. The fire had burned low hours ago, reduced to glowing coals, yet the warmth remained, not fading, not slipping away, just there, wrapped into the walls, stored in the stone. Atlas lay near the door, eyes half open, breathing slow, listening, always listening. Morning came with a hard, bright sky. The valley sparkled under a layer of frost, thicker than anything before. People stepped outside and felt it immediately. This wasn't a passing cold. This was something else, something settling in. Ben Avery stood near his workshop, hands in his pockets, watching his breath drift into the air. His gaze lifted toward the canyon again, toward the place no one believed in. He remembered the thin line of smoke, the steady one, not desperate, not constant, controlled. He frowned. Maybe, he muttered to himself. But he didn't finish the thought. Because thinking it meant admitting something, and no one was ready for that yet. By the end of that week, the valley had changed. Not visibly, not completely, but enough. Fires burned longer. Woodpiles shrank faster. People checked their doors twice before bed. And at night, the cold didn't leave. It stayed. Quiet, patient, waiting. Up in the alcove, Ethan Cole stood at the entrance, looking out over it all. Atlas sat beside him, still, unshaken. Ethan folded his arms, eyes scanning the distant homes. "They think this is the worst of it," he said quietly. Atlas didn't move. Ethan's gaze hardened slightly. But it's not. The wind shifted again, colder this time, sharper. Ethan stepped back inside, closing the door behind him, sealing the warmth in, sealing the cold out. Because he knew something they didn't. This wasn't winter yet. This was the warning, and the people down in that valley still didn't understand what was coming. The first snow arrived quietly. No wind, no warning, just a soft, steady fall that coated the valley in white by morning. Children stepped outside and smiled. Men nodded, satisfied. "This is how winter starts," Travis Boone said, standing on his porch, arms folded. "Nice and easy." Lily laughed as she kicked through the fresh powder, her boots leaving shallow tracks behind her. It looked harmless, peaceful, the kind of snow people remembered fondly. But Ethan Cole didn't step outside to admire it. He stood inside the alcove, watching, measuring, waiting. Atlas stood beside him, ears forward, body still, not relaxed, not tense, just ready. Because the quiet snow wasn't the storm. The second day, the wind came, low at first, a steady push across the valley that carried snow with it, drifting against fences and piling into corners. Still manageable, still familiar. People went about their routines, chopped wood, checked livestock, reinforced doors. "Nothing we haven't seen before," Walter Griggs said at the feed store. But his voice lacked certainty. Because the wind didn't fade. It grew. By the third night, it began. The sky turned gray before sunset, heavy, pressed low against the mountains like something closing in. Then the wind shifted, hard, violent. It slammed into the valley with a force that rattled windows and shook walls. Snow no longer fell. It flew, horizontal, sharp as sand against glass. Within hours, the world disappeared. White, endless, blinding. Inside Travis Boone's house, the fire roared, louder than ever. He fed log after log into it, stacking them faster than he had all season. Still, the room wouldn't hold heat. Cold crept in through the floor, through the walls, through places that had never mattered before. "Why is it still freezing?" Lily asked, her voice smaller now, her hands buried deep under blankets. "It's just the wind," Travis said, forcing confidence. "House just needs time to warm up." But even as he said it, he knew the fire wasn't winning. Across the valley, the same truth spread. Cabins groaned under the pressure of the storm. Roofs creaked. Doors shuddered against hinges. Smoke poured from chimneys in thick, desperate streams. Every family fought the same battle. Burn more wood. Stay closer to the fire. Endure. But the cold wasn't something you could fight head-on. It slipped in, took hold, stayed. Up in the alcove. The storm never arrived, not the way it did in the valley. The wind hit the canyon walls and broke apart. Its fury scattered and weakened before it could reach inside. Snow piled at the outer edge, forming a barrier that only made the space more insulated. Inside, the air stayed still, quiet, controlled. Ethan stood near the fireplace, adjusting the small flame. No rush, no panic, just steady, deliberate movement. Atlas lay nearby, head resting on his paws, eyes half open. Watching. But calm. Always calm. Ethan glanced at the thermometer. 71 degrees. He nodded once. "Hold steady," he murmured. The fire crackled softly. The stone behind the cabin absorbed the warmth, slowly, silently storing it. Outside, chaos. Inside, control. The storm intensified overnight. By morning, the valley had vanished completely beneath it. Fences disappeared under drifts. Paths were gone. Landmarks erased. Travel became dangerous. Then impossible. Ben Avery stood at his window, staring out into the white blur. He could barely see the barn 20 yards away. His fire burned strong, too strong. And still, he couldn't get warm. He stepped closer, holding his hands out to the flames. Heat touched his skin, then vanished, like it had nowhere to stay. Ben frowned. Something about it didn't make sense. He glanced toward the mountains, toward the canyon, toward the place he couldn't see anymore, but knew was there. And for the first time, doubt shifted. Not toward Ethan, toward everything else. The second night of the storm broke something in the valley. Woodpiles began to shrink too fast. Men who had calculated carefully began to recalculate. Then worry. Then silence, because no one wanted to say it out loud. But everyone was thinking it. What if it didn't stop? Inside Travis Boone's house, the fire never went out. It couldn't. Travis stayed awake, feeding it, watching it, refusing to let it drop even for a moment. Still, the cold pressed in, relentless. He walked to the door and placed his hand against it. Cold. Too cold. He turned back toward the room, toward Lily, now curled tighter than before, toward his wife who said nothing, but watched him with eyes that asked a question he didn't want to answer. Travis swallowed hard. "Just a bad stretch," he said. "It'll pass." But his voice was thinner now, less certain, because the storm didn't feel like something passing. It felt like something settling in. Up in the alcove, Ethan sat at the table cleaning his knife with slow, steady motions. Not because it needed cleaning, because routine mattered, because control mattered. Atlas lifted his head suddenly. Ethan didn't look up. He just said, "What is it?" Atlas stood, moving toward the entrance. This time, there was tension, not fear, awareness. Ethan rose, following him. He opened the door slightly. The wind howled outside, but distant, blocked, powerless against the stone. Still, something carried through it. A sound. Faint. Lost in the storm. But there. Ethan listened. Focused. Nothing clear. Nothing certain. Just enough to know. The valley was starting to struggle. He closed the door again. Locked it. Turned back inside. Atlas remained near the entrance, watching. Waiting. By the third day, the storm hadn't weakened. It had grown. Colder. Sharper. More dangerous. And the valley was no longer fighting to stay comfortable. It was fighting to survive. Ethan stood once more at the edge of the alcove, looking out into the endless white, his breath steady, his eyes focused. Atlas beside him, unmoving. "They're running out," Ethan said quietly. Atlas didn't respond. Ethan didn't expect him to. He folded his arms, watching, listening, waiting. Because he knew what came next. Not from guesswork. From experience, from places far worse than this, places where men learned too late. That cold doesn't forgive mistakes. It waits. And when it decides, it takes. Behind him, the cabin held its warmth. Steady, reliable, unshaken. Ahead of him, the valley was changing. Slowly at first, then all at once. And somewhere out there, someone would be the first to lose. The first to fall behind. The first to realize. They weren't prepared. And when that happened, everything would change. It didn't happen all at once. There was no loud moment. No warning shot. Just a silence where there shouldn't have been one. The storm had been raging for 3 straight days. No breaks, no easing. Just relentless wind, endless snow, and a cold so deep it didn't feel like weather anymore. It felt like pressure, like something pushing in from all sides. In the valley, people stopped stepping outside unless they had to. Doors stayed shut, windows stayed covered, fires burned without pause. Still, something was slipping. Walter Griggs noticed it first, not because he was smarter, but because he was older. And older men paid attention to things others ignored. On the 4th morning, Walter stepped out onto his porch just long enough to check the wind direction. He squinted through the white haze, looked toward the neighboring property across the narrow field. A small cabin. Belonged to Harlan Pike, an older ranch hand who had lived alone for years. Quiet man. Kept to himself. Always up early. Always a fire going. But today, there was no smoke. Walter frowned. That didn't make sense. He waited a moment longer, watching. Nothing. No movement. No sign of life. Just snow piling higher against the cabin walls. Walter stepped back inside, closing the door quickly. "Something's wrong," he muttered. His wife looked up from the stove. "What is it?" "Harlan's place," Walter said. "No smoke. She froze, just for a second, then shook her head. Maybe he's conserving wood. Walter didn't answer, because men like Harlan Pike didn't skip morning fires, not in weather like this. It took Walter nearly an hour to get across the field. The snow fought him every step. Wind pushed against him, stealing breath, blurring vision, turning distance into something uncertain. By the time he reached the cabin, his face was numb, his hands stiff even through gloves. He knocked, hard. No answer. He knocked again. Nothing. Walter tried the door. Frozen. He braced himself and pushed harder. The wood cracked slightly as ice broke loose. The door gave way just enough for him to force it open. Cold air rushed out. Not just cold, dead cold, inside. The fire was gone. Ash, nothing more. The room was still, too still. "Harlan?" Walter called out. No response. He stepped inside, boots crunching against frozen floorboards. Then he saw him. Harlan Pike lay in his bed, covered in blankets, face calm, as if he had simply gone to sleep and never woken up. Walter stopped moving, didn't speak, didn't breathe for a moment, because he understood exactly what had happened. The fire had died. The cold had taken the rest, quietly, without struggle, without warning. Walter removed his hat slowly, stood there in silence, then turned and left. Because there was nothing else to do. The news spread quickly, not loud, not dramatic, just passed from one house to another, so carried in short, quiet sentences. Harlan Pike didn't make it through the night. That was all it took. The valley shifted, not visibly, but deeply. The storm was no longer something to endure. It was something that could take, and had. At Travis Boone's house, the words hit harder than expected. He stood in the doorway as Walter finished speaking, snow swirling behind him. "You're sure?" Travis asked. Walter nodded once. "Fire went out," he said. "That's all it takes in this cold." Travis glanced back inside, at Lily, at the fire, at the walls that suddenly didn't feel as strong as they had before. Walter adjusted his coat. "You keep that fire going," he added, "no matter what." Then he stepped back into the storm, leaving Travis standing there, with something new pressing against him. Not pride, not confidence, fear. That night, the valley changed again. No one slept easily, not even the men who said they would. Fires burned hotter, brighter, desperate. People checked them again and again, refused to let them drop. Because now they knew. All it took was one mistake, one moment, one lapse. Up in the alcove, Ethan Cole stood near the entrance, Atlas beside him. The storm carried sound in strange ways, twisted, broken, but sometimes it carried enough. A distant voice, a call, lost in the wind. Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly. He listened harder, and for a split second, the mountain disappeared, replaced by another place, another time. Heat. Noise. A voice shouting, "Don't let it go out." Then silence. Ethan blinked. The alcove returned. The cold. The wind. Atlas. Always Atlas. The dog pressed gently against his leg, grounding him, pulling him back. Ethan exhaled slowly. "They lost someone," he said quietly. Atlas didn't move, didn't need to. Ethan looked out into the storm again. His jaw tightened slightly, not in anger, in understanding. Because this wasn't new to him. Not really. Different place, different enemy, same rule. If you lost control, you didn't get a second chance. He stepped back inside, closed the door, latched it tight. The warmth wrapped around him instantly. Steady, reliable, safe. Atlas returned to his spot near the fire. But he didn't lie down right away. He stood there, listening, still alert. Because something had shifted. Not in the alcove, but out there. In the valley. The storm tightened its grip, harder, colder, unforgiving. And now every man, every woman, every child understood something they hadn't before. This wasn't just winter. This was survival, and they weren't as ready as they thought. Ethan sat at the table, staring at the small flame in the fireplace, not thinking, not remembering, just watching. Atlas finally lay down beside him, head resting against Ethan's boot, solid, present. Ethan placed a hand on him, steady, warm, real. "You did your job," he murmured. The dog's tail moved once, because Atlas always did. Outside. The wind screamed, the cold deepened, and somewhere in the valley, a line had been crossed. Someone was gone, and the rest were closer to that edge than they wanted to admit. Ethan looked toward the door, not expecting anything, not yet. But knowing it wouldn't be long. Because once fear took hold, people stopped laughing and started looking for answers, even in places they once refused to believe in. The valley had gone quiet, not peaceful quiet, not the kind that comes after a long day. This was a different kind of silence, the kind that followed fear. By the fifth day, the storm had stripped the valley down to its limits. Woodpiles had shrunk to half of what they should have been. Then less. Men who once bragged about their supply now counted logs carefully, quietly, alone. No one said it out loud, but everyone was doing the math, and the numbers didn't look good. Inside Travis Boone's house, the fire had been burning nonstop. It never dropped below a roar, and still, it wasn't enough. Travis stood near the hearth, feeding another log into the flames. His hands were raw from splitting wood, his shoulders tight from days without rest. Behind him, Lily lay curled on the couch again. But this time, she wasn't talking. "Lily?" he called. No answer. He turned quickly. Her eyes were half closed, her breathing shallow, her skin pale, too pale. His wife knelt beside her, brushing a hand across Lily's forehead. "She's cold," she whispered. Travis swallowed hard. "That's not possible," he said. "The fire, it's not staying," she cut in, her voice breaking. "It's not staying in the house." That hit him, harder than anything, because he knew it was true. He had seen it for days now. The fire burned strong, but the heat didn't hold. It slipped away. Through the walls, through the floor, through every flaw he had never thought to fix. Lily stirred slightly. "Dad," she murmured weakly. "I'm here," he said quickly, kneeling beside her. Her hand was cold, too cold. Travis looked at the fire, at the wood stacked beside it, at how fast it was disappearing. Then he looked at the door, at the storm beyond it, at the distance to the canyon. His jaw tightened. Miles away, inside the alcove, Atlas lifted his head sharply. Ethan looked up immediately. The shift was instant. The dog stood, alert, focused, not reacting to the storm. Something else. Ethan rose slowly from his chair. "What is it?" he asked. Atlas moved toward the door, not aggressive, not defensive, but certain. Ethan followed. He opened the door just enough to listen. The wind rushed past the alcove, muted, broken. But through it, there was something. Faint. A sound that didn't belong to the storm. Ethan narrowed his eyes. Someone was out there. Back in the valley, Travis Boone wrapped Lily tightly in blankets, layer after layer. Not enough. It would never let enough. His wife grabbed his arm. "You can't go out there," she said. "You won't make it." Travis shook his head. "If we stay, she won't either." Silence filled the room. Heavy. Final. His wife looked at him. Really looked. And for the first time, the pride was gone. "Go," she whispered. Travis nodded once. He didn't hesitate again. The storm hit him like a wall. The moment he stepped outside, the cold tore into his lungs, stealing breath, stealing strength. Snow blinded him, wind shoved against him, and every step forward felt like fighting something alive. He pulled Lily closer to his chest, shielding her as best he could. "Stay with me," he muttered. "Stay with me, kid." He couldn't see the path, couldn't see the landmarks, only direction, only memory. The canyon, the alcove, the place he had laughed at, the place he had called foolish. Now, the only place he could think of. Up ahead, the storm shifted slightly, just enough. The shape of the canyon began to emerge through the white. Travis stumbled forward, nearly falling twice, his legs already weakening from the cold. "Come on," he whispered. Then he saw it. The alcove. Dark against the storm. Still. Unmoving. Like it didn't belong to the same world. Hope surged through him, sharp, desperate. He pushed forward. Inside, Ethan stepped back from the door. "He's close," he said quietly. Atlas stood rigid now, eyes locked on the entrance. Ready, but not aggressive. Ethan moved to the fire, adding a small piece of wood. Not much, just enough. Then he turned back toward the door, waited. The knock came weak, barely audible over the wind. But Atlas heard it. Ethan heard it. He moved immediately, unlocking the latch and pulling the door open. The storm surged in for a split second, then stopped, blocked, held back by the alcove. Travis Boone stood in the doorway, barely. His body leaned forward, strength almost gone, arms wrapped around Lily. His face was pale, his eyes wide, and for the first time since Ethan had met him, there was no arrogance, no pride, only one thing: fear. Ethan didn't speak, didn't ask questions. He stepped aside. "Get inside," he said. Travis staggered forward. The moment he crossed the threshold, everything changed. Warmth hit him like a physical force. Not a blast, not overwhelming, but constant, solid, real. It wrapped around him instantly, cutting through the cold that had been buried in his bones. Travis stopped, just for a second, because his body didn't understand it, didn't believe it. He looked around the cabin, the small fire, the stone, the quiet. Then his eyes found the thermometer. 74 degrees. His breath caught. "That's not possible," he whispered. Behind him, the storm screamed. Inside, nothing moved. Lily shifted in his arms. A faint sound escaped her. Warmer. Alive. Ethan stepped closer. "Lay her down," he said. Travis obeyed without hesitation, because whatever this place was, Whatever Ethan had built, it wasn't a mistake. It wasn't madness. It was something else entirely. Atlas approached slowly, not threatening, not cautious. He moved to Lily's side, lowering himself near her, close enough to share warmth, watching, guarding, present. Travis looked at the dog, then at Ethan, then back at the room. And the truth hit him all at once. Everything he had said, everything he had believed, everything he had laughed at, was wrong. His voice broke slightly. I didn't think... Ethan didn't let him finish. You're here now, he said simply. That was all that mattered. Outside, the storm raged harder than ever, but inside the alcove, the mountain held its warmth, and for the first time since the cold had begun, someone from the valley understood. This wasn't luck. This wasn't chance. This was design, and it had just saved a life. Travis lowered himself into a chair slowly, his strength finally giving way. He stared at the fire, at the stone, at the place he once mocked, and for the first time, he didn't laugh. He didn't speak. He just sat there, realizing how close he had come to losing everything. Travis Boone sat there, hands trembling slightly, staring at the fire like it might vanish if he blinked. But it didn't. The flames stayed small, controlled. Nothing like the roaring inferno he had been feeding back home. And yet, the warmth filled the room, every corner, every surface. It didn't flicker. It didn't fade. It stayed. That was the part his mind couldn't grasp. Lily shifted on the bed. A soft sound escaped her lips. Ethan moved quickly, but calmly, placing a folded blanket beneath her head, adjusting the layers around her body. Give it a minute, he said quietly. Her body's coming back from the cold. Travis leaned forward, eyes locked on his daughter. She's going to be okay? He asked. Ethan didn't answer right away. He studied Lily, her breathing, her color, the slow return of movement in her fingers. Then he nodded once. She's already better than when you came in. Travis exhaled sharply, like he had been holding his breath for miles. Atlas remained beside Lily. Close. Still. The dog's body radiated warmth, his thick coat acting like another layer of protection. His eyes never left her, not in fear, not in concern, but in focus. Guarding, watching. Ethan noticed it, always did. He's got her, Ethan said quietly. Travis looked at the dog again, really looked this time. Not just an animal, not just a companion. Something more. Minutes passed, then more. The cabin didn't change. The temperature didn't drop. The fire didn't need more wood. It just worked. Travis finally stood, moving slowly through the space, his eyes tracing every detail. The walls, the ceiling, the way everything fit together. No gaps, no drafts, no cold creeping in. He stopped near the door, placing his hand against it. Warm, not cold like his own, not fighting the outside, holding its ground against it. He turned back toward Ethan. How? He asked, not accusing, not mocking, just asking. Ethan leaned lightly against the table. It's not the fire, he said. Travis frowned. That fire wouldn't heat a shed, he replied. Ethan nodded. Exactly. That answer hung in the air for a moment. Then Ethan stepped toward the back wall. Come here. Travis followed. Ethan placed his hand against the wood. Feel that? Travis pressed his palm against it. Warm, not just surface warm. Deep, like the heat wasn't sitting on it, but inside it. "What is that?" Travis asked. Ethan turned slightly, pointing behind the wall. "Stone." Travis blinked. "The cliff?" Ethan nodded. "It's holding the heat." Travis stared at him. "That doesn't make sense." "It does," Ethan said calmly. "Just not the way you've been thinking about it." He walked toward the fireplace. "The fire isn't heating the air," he explained. "It's heating the mass." Travis followed his movement, still trying to understand. "The stone absorbs it," Ethan continued, "stores it, then releases it slowly over time." Travis glanced back at the wall, then at the small flame, then at the thermometer. 74 degrees. "You're telling me," Travis said slowly, "that the mountain is heating your cabin?" Ethan gave a slight nod. "I'm telling you I'm not losing heat the way you are." That landed harder than anything else, because Travis knew exactly what he meant. His cabin wasn't just cold, it was leaking, bleeding heat faster than the fire could replace it, and no matter how much wood he burned, he couldn't catch up. Lily stirred again, this time stronger. Her eyes fluttered open slightly. "Dad?" Travis rushed back to her side. "I'm here," he said quickly. She looked around, confused. "It's warm," she whispered. Her voice was clearer now, stronger. Tears filled Travis's eyes before he could stop them. "Yeah," he said softly. "It's warm." Atlas shifted slightly, resting his head near her arm. She reached out weakly, her fingers brushing against his fur. The dog didn't move, just stayed, letting her feel something steady, something safe. Travis sat beside her, one hand gripping hers, the other resting against his knee. His shoulders sagged slightly. The fight had left him. Not physically, but mentally. Because the truth was in front of him now. Clear. Undeniable. He looked across the room at Ethan. "You knew," he said quietly. Ethan didn't answer right away. He looked toward the fire, then back at Travis. "I prepared," he said. That was it. No pride, no explanation, just fact. Outside, the storm surged again, wind slamming into the canyon walls, snow whipping through the air. But inside, nothing changed. The warmth held. The silence remained. The system worked. Travis leaned back in the chair slowly, exhaustion catching up to him. His hands still trembled slightly, not from the cold anymore, but from everything else. "I laughed at you," he said. Ethan shrugged lightly. "You weren't the only one." Travis shook his head. "I thought you were crazy." Ethan gave a small, almost invisible nod. "That didn't matter." Travis let out a breath. "No," he said. "It didn't. Because now none of that mattered. Not the jokes, not the pride, not the way things were always done. What mattered was simple. His daughter was alive. Because of this place, because of this man, because of something he didn't understand. Until now." Atlas lifted his head slightly, ears twitching. Ethan noticed immediately. "What is it?" he asked. The dog stood, moved toward the door. This time there was no doubt. More were coming. Ethan stepped closer, listening. Faint sounds carried through the storm again. Voices, distant, but there. Travis looked up. "They're going to start coming," he said. Ethan didn't respond. He already knew, because once one person crossed that line, others would follow, not out of curiosity, out of necessity. Ethan moved to the fire, adjusting it slightly. Not adding much, just enough. Atlas remained near the door, watching, waiting. Travis looked around the cabin one more time, at the walls, at the stone, at the warmth that didn't fade, and something settled in his mind. Something final. This wasn't just shelter. It was the difference between holding on and not making it. He looked at Ethan. "You built something no one else did," he said. Ethan met his gaze. "I built something that works." Outside, the storm howled louder, closer, harder, and somewhere beyond it, more footsteps were already fighting their way toward the alcove, because the impossible had just been proven real, and now, it was the only thing that could save them. The knock came again. Stronger this time, not confident, desperate. Ethan moved without hesitation. Atlas was already at the door, standing firm, body angled forward, not aggressive, but ready. Ethan unlatched it. The storm surged for a split second, then broke. Two figures stumbled inside. Ben Avery and Walter Griggs, both half frozen, faces pale, breath ragged. Walter nearly collapsed as soon as he crossed the threshold. "Easy," Ethan said, catching his arm and guiding him to a chair. Ben stood frozen in place. Not from the cold, from what he felt. Warmth. Real warmth. His eyes drifted slowly across the cabin. The walls, the fire, the stillness, then locked onto the thermometer. 74 degrees. His voice came out low. "How is this possible?" Travis looked at him. Same question. Different man. Same answer waiting. Within minutes, the cabin filled with quiet movement. Blankets passed. Water warmed. Positions adjusted. No panic. No shouting. Just order. Ethan moved through it all like he had done this before. Because he had. Not in a cabin. Not in a storm like this. But in places where survival depended on calm. Not chaos. Atlas moved too. Between people. Checking. Pausing beside Walter until his breathing steadied. Then back to the door. Always watching. Ben sat slowly near the fire, rubbing his hands together. "They're running out down there," he said, voice shaking slightly. "Wood, heat, everything." Ethan nodded once. "I know." Ben looked at him. "You knew this would happen." It wasn't an accusation. It was realization. Ethan didn't answer right away. He crouched near the fireplace, adjusting a small log, keeping the flame controlled. Then he said quietly, "I knew what the cold does when it's not managed." Ben leaned forward slightly. "And this?" He gestured around the room. "So, this manages it?" Ethan stood. "Not the way you think." He stepped toward the back wall again. Travis watched. Ben watched. Walter, half-conscious, listened. Ethan placed his hand flat against the wood. "This isn't where the heat stays," he said. Then he turned and walked to the narrow gap behind the cabin. He opened the side access panel. Cold air brushed in, but faint, limited. "Come here," he said. Ben followed first. Travis behind him. They stepped into the gap carefully. And then, they felt it. The stone. Warm. Not surface warm. Not from the air. Deep. Stored. Alive with heat. Ben's eyes widened. "That's impossible." Ethan shook his head. "No," he said. "It's physics." He stepped closer to the stone wall. "Heat doesn't disappear," he explained. "It moves, it transfers, it looks for cold and balances it." Ben listened, focused. trying to understand. Ethan continued. Out there, he said, gesturing toward the storm. Your cabins are surrounded by freezing air, so every bit of heat you make gets pulled away. Travis nodded slowly. He had felt that, seen it, watched it happen. But here, Ethan said, tapping the stone lightly, the heat goes into this. Ben ran his hand along the rock again. It holds it, he murmured. Ethan nodded. Thousands of pounds of stone. It absorbs heat all day, then releases it slowly, all night. Walter, still seated inside, called weakly, like a battery. Ethan glanced back. Exactly. They stepped back inside. The warmth wrapped around them again, constant, reliable. Ben looked around the cabin with new eyes now. Not confusion, understanding. You're not heating the air, he said slowly. Ethan met his gaze. I'm heating the system. That changed everything. Travis sat heavily in his chair. So no matter how big my fire is, he said, it won't matter if I keep losing heat. Ethan nodded once. You're fighting the cold, he said. Then he glanced toward the stone. I'm using it. Silence followed. Not heavy, not tense, just the sound of something clicking into place. Atlas moved closer to the fire, then back toward the door. He paused, listened, ears forward. Ethan noticed. More, he said quietly. Ben stood. You're going to let them in? Ethan looked at him. Calm, steady. I'm not turning anyone away. Travis exhaled slowly. They won't all fit. No, Ethan said, then added, but they'll last longer here than out there. That was enough. The knock came again, this time louder, faster. Ethan moved to the door, Atlas beside him. He opened it. Another wave of snow tried to push in, but failed. Two more figures stumbled through, then another. Faces pale, hands shaking, eyes wide with the same disbelief, the same realization. Every one of them had heard about the alcove, about the warmth, about the man they had laughed at. Now, they weren't laughing. The cabin filled, not crowded, but alive. People moved carefully, respectfully. No one spoke louder than needed, because something about the space demanded it. Calm, control, survival. Ethan stood near the center, watching it all. Not overwhelmed, not uncertain, just aware. Every movement, every breath, every person. Atlas stayed close, circling once, then settling again near the door. Guarding, always guarding. Ben leaned closer to Ethan. You could have told us, he said quietly. Ethan shook his head. You wouldn't have listened. Ben looked around, at the people, at the warmth, at the storm outside, then nodded slowly. You're right. Travis sat beside Lily, one hand resting gently on her shoulder. She was breathing easier now, color returning, alive. He looked up at Ethan, something unspoken passing between them. Respect. Not forced, not spoken, earned. Outside, the storm continued its assault, unrelenting, unforgiving. But inside the alcove, the system held, the stone held, the warmth held. And for the first time since the cold began, the valley had something it didn't have before. Not just shelter, not just fire, but understanding. Ethan looked toward the door once more, listening, waiting. Because he knew this wasn't the end of it. Not yet. The storm wasn't done, and neither was the test. But now, they had a chance because the secret wasn't hidden anymore. It was shared. And that meant they might survive it. The alcove became something new that night. Not just a cabin, not just shelter, a system, a lifeline. Ethan didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Coats off," he said calmly. "Slow. Don't shock your body." People obeyed. Not because he demanded it, because everything around them proved he knew what he was doing. Wet gloves were removed. Snow-packed boots set near the entrance. Blankets passed from one to another. No one rushed. No one panicked. The warmth did its work. Steady. Patient. Ethan moved among them, assigning positions with quiet precision. "Stay off the walls, hun," he said. "Let the heat circulate. Rotate near the fire. No crowding. Keep the door clear." Every instruction had purpose. Every movement built around control. Atlas worked just as carefully. He moved from person to person, nose brushing against hands, checking, reading. When someone shifted too close to the door, he stepped between them and the cold without being told. A child near the back began to cry softly. Atlas walked over. Sat. Close enough to be felt. The crying stopped. Lily stirred again, stronger this time. Her eyes opened fully, confusion fading as warmth settled deeper into her body. "Dad?" she said, clearer now. Travis leaned forward instantly. "I'm right here." She looked around slowly, at the room, at the people, at the dog beside her. "Is this his place?" she asked. Travis nodded. Lily reached out again, placing her hand gently on Atlas's fur. "Good dog," she whispered. Atlas didn't move, just stayed. Outside, the storm pushed harder. It had not weakened. If anything, it had grown sharper. The wind changed direction, driving snow deeper into the valley, building drifts against doors and walls. Structures strained, wood groaned, weak points failed, and still, inside the alcove, nothing shifted. The temperature held. The system held. Ben Avery stood near the back wall, watching the stone. He placed his hand against it again, still warm, still releasing. He turned toward Ethan. This could be built elsewhere," he said. Ethan glanced at him. "Not exactly like this," he replied. "But the principle, yes." Ben nodded slowly. Already thinking. Already learning. Walter Griggs, now steadier, sat near the fire, shaking his head in quiet disbelief. "All these years," he muttered, "burning twice what we needed, freezing anyway." Ethan didn't respond, because the truth didn't need defending. Another sound cut through the storm. Closer this time. Atlas stood instantly. Ethan looked up. "They're still coming," Travis said quietly. Ethan moved toward the door again, opened it. Two figures stumbled in, then a third, faces drawn tight with cold, eyes wide with the same realization. No one spoke. They didn't need to. The warmth said everything. The cabin filled to its limit, not crowded, but complete. Ethan adjusted again. "Some of you will need to rotate out in short intervals," he said. "Stay close. Don't travel alone." Heads nodded. No one argued. Hours passed. Then more. Time blurred inside the alcove, not marked by fear, but by survival. People took turns near the fire, near the walls, near the center. Water warmed, hands thawed, breath slowed. At one point, a sudden crack echoed faintly through the canyon. Not from the alcove, from outside. A distant structure giving way under pressure. The sound carried just enough to be heard, just enough to be understood. No one spoke, because they all knew what it meant. Atlas moved toward the entrance again, paused, then suddenly surged forward. Ethan reacted instantly. "What is it?" The dog pushed through the open edge of the alcove into the snow just beyond. Travis stood. "Atlas!" Ethan followed, stepping just outside. The wind slammed into him, but weakened quickly within the canyon's protection. Atlas was already moving downslope, fast, purposeful. Ethan saw it then. A small shape, half buried, struggling, a child. Ethan moved without hesitation. Through the snow, against the wind. Atlas reached the child first, barking once, sharp, controlled. The boy turned weakly. Ethan lifted him quickly, wrapping him in his coat. "Got you," he said. Atlas stayed close, guiding them back toward the alcove. Every step mattered. Every second counted. They crossed back inside. The warmth hit instantly. The boy's shaking slowed. A woman cried out, rushing forward. "My son!" "He's okay," Ethan said firmly. "Just cold." She dropped to her knees beside him, tears streaming. Atlas stood nearby, watching, then slowly returned to his position. Guarding. Travis watched the whole thing. The movement, the speed, the precision. Not panic, not hesitation. Action. The kind that came from experience. From knowing exactly what to do when it mattered most. He looked at Ethan, then at Atlas, then back at the room filled with people who would not have made it through the night anywhere else. "You didn't just build a cabin," Travis said quietly. Ethan didn't answer. He didn't need to. The storm began to ease near dawn. Not fully, but enough. The wind softened. The snow slowed. The pressure lifted slightly from the valley. Inside the alcove, people rested. Not asleep, but safe. For now. Ethan stood near the entrance once more, Atlas beside him. They looked out over the valley, still buried, still dangerous, but no longer unseen. "They'll make it now," Ben said behind him. Ethan didn't turn. "Some will," he replied, then added quietly, "because they came." Travis stepped forward slowly. He didn't smile, didn't try to lighten the moment. He just spoke the truth. "I was wrong." Ethan glanced at him. Travis met his eyes. "I laughed at you," he said. "Thought you were out of your mind." Ethan held his gaze, then gave a small nod. "You weren't the only one." Travis shook his head. "No," he said, "but I was the loudest." Silence followed. Then Travis added, "Thank you." Simple, honest, final. Atlas sat between them, still, steady. A quiet presence in a moment that didn't need anything more. Behind them, the cabin held its warmth, the stone held its heat, and the people inside held on to something they didn't have before. Not just survival, not just hope, but a new understanding. Because when the storm came again, and it would, they wouldn't face it the same way, and neither would the valley. Because now, they knew what worked. The storm didn't end all at once. It loosened its grip slowly, like something reluctant to let go. The wind faded first, then the snow, then the sound of it, constant, overwhelming, finally gave way to something the valley hadn't heard in days. Silence. Real silence. By morning, the sky had cleared. Blue, sharp, unforgiving in its brightness. The valley lay buried beneath layers of snow, reshaped by the storm. Fences disappeared. Rooflines softened. Paths erased completely. But smoke rose again, from chimneys that had nearly gone dark. Thin at first, then steadier. Life returning. Inside the alcove, people began to move, slowly, carefully, not with urgency, with awareness. They stepped outside in small groups, blinking against the light, adjusting to the cold that still lingered, but no longer ruled. Travis Boone stood at the edge of the alcove, looking out over the valley. Different now. Everything looked the same, but nothing felt the same. He glanced back once, at the cabin, at the place he had mocked, then down at Lily, standing beside him, wrapped in layers but smiling again. "You ready?" he asked. She nodded. But before they stepped away, she turned, walked back inside. Atlas was near the door, watching, always watching. Lily wrapped her arms around his neck gently. "Thank you," she whispered. Atlas didn't move, didn't need to. Ethan stood nearby, quiet, watching the moment without stepping into it, because some things didn't belong to him. The valley moved carefully that day. People returned to their homes, some damaged, some barely holding, some gone. Harlan Pike's cabin stood silent, covered in snow, a reminder no one ignored anymore. Walter Griggs removed his hat as he passed it. Others did the same. No words. None needed. By afternoon, small groups gathered in town, not at the diner, not in comfort, but in purpose. Ben Avery stood near the center of it, sketching rough lines into the snow with a stick. "Here," he said, drawing a shape. Back wall against stone, air gap, controlled fire. Men leaned in, listening, not laughing. Travis stood among them, quiet, then spoke. "He's right," he said. Every head turned. "I burned twice what I should have," Travis continued, "and still lost heat." He paused, then added, "Ethan didn't." That was all it took. Construction wouldn't start until spring, but the thinking had already changed. Men looked at stone differently now, at land differently, at the way they built, at the way they survived. Up in the alcove, the cabin remained as it had been, quiet, steady, unchanged. Ethan moved through it slowly, checking small details, adjusting, refining. Not because it had failed, because it hadn't. Atlas followed him, always near, always present. That evening, as the sun dropped behind the mountains, the valley glowed with a soft golden light against the endless white. Ethan stepped outside, Atlas beside him. They stood at the edge of the alcove, looking out, not searching, not measuring, just watching. The same valley, the same land. But something inside it had shifted. Not in the ground, not in the snow, in the people. Footsteps approached behind them. Ethan didn't turn right away. He already knew who it was. Travis stopped a few feet back, not stepping into Ethan's space, not pushing forward, just standing. "I wanted to say it again," he said. Ethan glanced over his shoulder. "Say what?" Travis met his eyes. Thank you. Simple. Direct. No pride left in it. Ethan nodded once. You made the walk, he said. Travis looked out at the valley. I almost didn't. Ethan didn't respond. Because he knew, and Travis knew, and that was enough. They stood in silence for a moment. Then Travis turned to leave, but paused. One more thing, he said. Ethan waited. Travis gestured toward the cabin. We're going to build different, he said. All of us. Ethan looked back at the alcove, at the stone, at the structure that had held when everything else failed. Good, he said. Travis nodded, then walked away. The light faded. The temperature dropped again. But this time, it didn't carry the same weight. Because the valley had learned, not everything, not yet, but enough. Ethan sat just outside the cabin, back against the stone. Atlas lowered himself beside him, resting his head across Ethan's boot. The warmth from the rock still lingered, held, stored, given back slowly. Ethan reached down, resting his hand against the dog's neck. For a long moment, he didn't think about the past, didn't hear the echoes, didn't feel the pull. Just the present, the cold, the warmth, the quiet. The mountain remembers, Ethan said softly. Atlas's ear flicked slightly. Ethan looked out over the valley one last time, at the homes, at the smoke rising again, at the people who would rebuild, smarter this time, stronger. He nodded to himself, not proud, not satisfied, just certain, because the lesson had been learned, not through words, not through theory, through survival. And long after the storm had passed, long after the snow melted and the valley returned to green, that lesson would remain. In every wall built against stone, in every fire that burned smarter, in every life that didn't have to be lost. The mountain held its warmth, silent, enduring, just like it always had. But now, someone had finally understood it. And because of that, others would too. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. Atlas shifted closer. And for the first time in a long time, there was no noise left inside him. Only stillness, only warmth, only peace. If you believe a man should be free to build his life his way and protect what matters most, type yes in the comments. And if this story meant something to you, go ahead and subscribe. There are more real stories like this waiting for you.